Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So a little while back, I asked myself the question, is it possible to build a $1 Commander deck? And I actually had a lot of fun building that deck, and many of you seem to really enjoy that episode in that concept too. So I am back at it again today with a deck that only costs 84 cents total. Yes, that's right, less than $1 whole for one whole deck. So to do this, each and every single card outside of the commander is exactly 1 cent. Also, I should mention that this is just the non-land cards of the deck because the basics are excluded from the cost. And actually, the shipping cost for the deck might actually cost more than the deck itself, but still, come on, 84 cents is pretty good for every single non-land card in the actual deck. But with all that said, let's jump into it and talk about what commander I picked for this deck and why. So the commander that I chose for this deck was Arami of the Dead Tide. Now before we jump into what this commander actually does, there are a couple of reasons first off why I chose this commander for the deck. When I was narrowing down commanders to select for the deck, obviously I wanted the entire deck to cost less than $1 in total, so yeah, I needed a commander that was around 30 cents or less. And currently Arami's price was at 21 cents, so yeah, not too bad. On top of that, Arami is a 2-color commander, which I think is probably the best amount of colors when it comes to a deck that's going to be on this tight of a budget because you don't really have that big of a card pool to select from. So because of that, if you build a monocolor deck, you are very, very, very constrained on what you can put in that deck because, yeah, you've just got access to one color. Conversely, you also probably wouldn't want to go with a commander that's got 3 or more colors. Though this would give you access to more cards, it also would be a lot harder to fix your mana properly on this type of a budget. So a 2-color commander keeps our deck simple enough to make it so that we have the right mana that we need, while also giving us access to enough cards. Regardless, there are actually a decent amount of commanders that fit these requirements, being a very cost-effective 2-color commander. But Arami really stood out to me as one that had a lot of potential on a budget. So let's jump into the commander and talk about what it does and why it works really well with budget cards. It's a 1/4 Merfolk Wizard that costs 1 blue black. It has tap, exile cards from your graveyard equal to the number of opponents you have, target creature card in your graveyard gains Encore until end of turn, the Encore cost is equal to its mana cost. Encore means that you exile the creature card and pay its mana cost, and for each opponent you get a token copy that attacks that opponent this turn if able. They gain haste, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery. This can be an incredibly impactful effect, basically giving you up to 3 copies of one creature out of your graveyard, and yeah, we can really use and abuse some ETBs and LTBs with this. And it might surprise you, but there are some really effective ETBs and LTBs even with just 1 cent creatures. So let's get things started and jump into the actual cards and talk about what this deck wants to do and how it's gonna win. First off, when it comes to card draw, we can really utilize cards like Phyrexian Rager, Tithe-Bearer Giant, and Library Larcenist. Phyrexian Rager is a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, we draw a card and lose 1 life. I've said this many times before, and I'll say it again, 1 life for 1 card is no big deal in Commander. So obviously, when we get this out, we get that ETB, but more importantly, when this goes into our graveyard and we can utilize it with our Commander, well, we're going to be getting 3 copies of this and drawing 3 cards and paying 3 life, but again, that's going to be well worth it. And again, when we're giving it Encore with our Commander, we just have to pay 3 mana to draw those 3 cards, so yeah, it's pretty fantastic. In a similar way, there's Tithe-Bearer Giant, a 4/5 giant warrior, and when it enters the battlefield, we draw a card and lose 1 life, so the exact same thing. Yes, this one does cost twice as much, but it also hits twice as hard swinging at our opponents. And then Library Larcenist doesn't hit anywhere near as hard just being a 1/2 Merfolk Rogue, but it doesn't lose us any life because when it attacks, we draw a card. Again, keep in mind that the Encore copies have haste, so we can swing with them right away and draw cards from these. In a similar way, we've got Audacious Thief, a 2/2 human rogue, and when it attacks we draw a card and lose 1 life, so pretty much the same thing as that last card, but we lose a life, and again, that's okay. Because in this deck we also have ways to gain life like Bushmeat Poacher. It's a 2/4 human soldier, and by paying 1 and tapping it, we sacrifice another creature to gain life equal to that creature's toughness and draw a card. Keep in mind that with Encore, we're going to have to sacrifice the creatures that are attacking anyways, so we might as well just sacrifice them with this and draw a card and gain some life. And also if we Encore this, if we've got the mana for it, we can just actually pay to have each of them sacrifice each other, well, at least 2 of them. Regardless, this can also be an effective way to get other creatures into our graveyard that we want to Encore to take advantage of their ETBs or LTBs again. But a different kind of card draw comes with Ire Ruin Expedition, an enchantment for 1 and a blue. It's got landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a quest counter on Ire Ruin Expedition. And by removing 3 quest counters from it, we're going to sacrifice it and draw 2 cards. So it is a delayed card draw, but it is very cost efficient. Next up, we've also got some looters that can really help us out with Erratic Visionary, Soothsayer Adept, and Seeker of Insight. Erratic Visionary is a 1/3 human wizard that has pay 1 and a blue, tap it, draw a card, then discard a card. And then Soothsayer Adept does the exact same thing. And then Seeker of Insight is also a 1/3 that can tap to loot, but we can only activate its ability if we've cast a non-creature spell this turn. Regardless, these looters can come in really handy in this deck. They can help us ditch dead cards in our hand to hopefully draw something better. And of course, they can also, just get a creature into our graveyard that we'd rather Encore than actually cast, then, sacrifice or have them die and then Encore. So in a way, it kind of helps us skip a step by getting a needed creature into our graveyard for our commander. Or it also helps us get fuel for our commander because again, our commander has to exile other things to actually make our creatures Encore. And speaking of getting things into our graveyard, we're also going to be utilizing cards like Strategic Planning, Pop Quiz, and Sift. Strategic Planning says look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them in your hand and the rest in your graveyard. So with this, we can get a needed card into our hand and some dead cards into our graveyard for exile or a creature into our exile for our commander. And then next up, we've got Pop Quiz, which is an instant that's going to draw us a card, and it says Learn, and Learn in Commander is essentially Rummage, which means we discard a card to draw a card. Next up, there's Sift, which is a sorcery that says draw 3 cards, then discard a card. So again, with these, we can help fill our hand as well as our graveyard at the same time. But next up, let's talk about Dark Bargain, Prying Eyes, and 4C. Dark Bargain says look at the top 3 cards of our library, put 2 of them in your hand and the other in your graveyard. Dark Bargain deals 2 damage to you. So again, 2 life for 2 cards is not a big deal, and we even get a card in our graveyard as well. And then at 4 blue, we've got Prying Eyes, which says draw 4 cards, then discard 2 cards. So this can help us draw a good amount of cards and then discard some cards as well to help our graveyard. Next up, there's 4C, which can help us dig pretty deep by helping us scry 4, then draw 2. While scrying isn't card advantage, it is card selection, so they can help us get rid of dead cards off the top of our library and get to the cards that we need. So because of that, we're also going to be utilizing some creatures that can help us scry with Omen Speaker, Sage's Row Savant, and Lost Legion. Each of these have, when they enter the battlefield, scry 2. So again, just getting 1 copy of these in play can help us by giving us some card selection. But then when we Encore them from our graveyard, we're going to get 3 copies of them, and that's a lot of scrying. 3 separate instances of Scry 2 can really help us dig through our deck to get to the exact cards that we need. So because of that, we're also going to be running Octoprophet and Cloud Reader Sphinx. Each of them is also going to help us Scry 2 when they enter the battlefield, and Cloud Reader Sphinx even has flying, so it's going to get through on most opponents for an extra 3 damage. So again, when we Encore, we can get some card selection and some extra damage in. But though Scrying is effective, there's an even more effective, similar mechanic to this one for this deck. And that would be Surveil, which we see on creatures like Dimir Informant and Watcher in the Mist. Surveil is essentially the exact same thing as Scry, but instead of putting cards on the bottom of our library that we don't want, we put them in our graveyard. So these 2 creatures can help us dig through our deck as well as fill our graveyard. Both Dimir Informant and Watcher in the Mist have, when they enter the battlefield, Surveil too. And again, keep in mind that Watcher in the Mist is a 3/4 flyer, so we can get some extra damage through with this. Next up, Towering Mystic is a 2/1, and when it deals damage, target player mills that many cards. Now obviously, while we can use this to mill an opponent, most of the time we're going to be milling ourselves with it. So if we Encore and swing with 3 copies of this, that's going to be 6 cards hitting our graveyard, which gives us more access to more creatures and more cards that we can exile with our commander. And speaking of milling, we've also got Coma's Faithful, Hominid Explorer, and Crow of Dark Tidings. Coma's Faithful is a 3/1 elf cleric that has lifelink, and when it dies, each player mills 3 cards. So again, with 3 opponents, by Encoring this, we're going to be gaining 9 life and milling each player for 9. So yeah, that's pretty fantastic. And then Hominid Explorer is a 3/3 Hominid Scout, and I actually didn't realize that Hominids had scouts, but that's pretty cool. Regardless, when it enters the battlefield, target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. So again, on Encore, that's going to be milling ourselves for 12 for just 4 mana from 1 card. And speaking of milling ourselves for 12, there's Crow of Dark Tidings, a 2/1 zombie bird with flying. When it enters the battlefield or dies, we mill 2 cards. So this has not only just an ETB, but also a death trigger that we get to take advantage of. And thanks to Encore making us sacrifice those tokens, we're going to be getting both. Now, as effective as these cards are at milling us, there's still one card that I believe stands above the rest in this deck, and that's going to be the golden pick of the deck, which is the number 1 card out of our 99. And the golden pick for this deck is Sage's Roe Denizen. Sage's Roe Denizen is a 2/3 Vidalcan Wizard for 2 and a blue. It says, whenever another blue creature enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So yeah, this is an absolutely incredible creature to have in play for this deck. When we encore any blue creature, again assuming that we've got 3 opponents, we get 3 copies of that creature, and then this triggers 3 times. So whenever we encore a blue creature, we mill ourselves for 6 each time just by having this in play. That can fuel our graveyard and give us access to even more creatures for us to pick from. And then if this happens to die and we encore it, well, it's still going to mills for a ton when we do that. Each of the copies are going to see each other, so again, assuming a 3-opponent encore, that means that we're going to be milling ourselves for, what, 12? On top of that, after we do encore these, if we've got some extra mana to cast more blue creatures, we're going to mill ourselves for 6 for each of those creatures. So yeah, Sage's Roe Denizen can do a ton of work in milling us and helping keeping our graveyard full. And again, in some circumstances, if we're set up correctly, we could even utilize this to mill out an opponent. Regardless, this 1-cent card puts in a ton of work for this deck, and that's what makes it the Golden Pig. But next up, let's talk about some creatures that can help us make some tokens with Discordant Piper, Deathbloom Thalit, and Aviation Pioneer. When Discordant Piper dies, we get a 0/1 goat creature token. Deathbloom Thalit has when it dies, we get a 1/1 green sapling, and Aviation Pioneer has when it enters the battlefield, we get a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So again, keep in mind whether it's a death trigger or an ETB, we can really take advantage of these creatures with Encore. Because again, essentially, we're getting that trigger 3 times, again, 1 for each of the tokens we make. So this can be even more effective with bigger token makers like Boneclad Necromancer and Malfeld Twins. Boneclad Necromancer says when it enters the battlefield, you may exile target creature card from a graveyard. If you do, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So this not only can hamper a graveyard strategy for an opponent, but at the same time, it's giving us a token. Or again, should I say, 3 tokens on the Encore. And then Malfeld Twins is a 4/4 zombie, and when it dies, we get 2 2/2 black zombies. So again, on Encore, that's going to be 3 4/4s swinging at our opponents, and then also when they die, we get 2 zombies apiece, so that's 6 zombies in total. It's kind of like almost half of an Army of the Damned for this deck. Regardless, outside of creatures that help us with tokens, or help us with mill, or card advantage, we've got plenty of other creatures that can help us out in different ways. So now let's move on and talk about cards like Bloodtoll Harpy, Skymarch Bloodletter, and Nocturnal Feeder. Bloodtoll Harpy is a 2/1 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, each player loses 1 life. Skymarch Bloodletter is a 2/2 Vampire Soldier with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And Nocturnal Feeder is a 2/1 Vampire Rogue with flying, and when it dies, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So each of these can be a great way to drain our opponents on either an ETB or an LTB. And by encoring them, these effects can really stack up. And also keep in mind that this deck has a good amount of flyers in it, including these. So getting some extra damage in with flyers can really help us get our opponent's life totals down. But outside of flying, we've also got some ways to deal with our opponent's creatures as well and help get our other creatures through with things like Skeleton Archer, Eyeblade Assassin, and Grim Physician. Skeleton Archer is a 3/3 Skeleton Archer. Actually, I just noticed that. That's pretty funny. Anyways, when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to any target. So this can either help us ping down some creatures, or actually ping down some players too. And then Eyeblade Assassin is a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And then Grim Physician does the exact same thing, but on a death trigger. So on Encore, these can either get rid of a couple of really small creatures, or one somewhat medium-sized one. But one that can help us get rid of pretty much any creatures on the board is Blight Breath Catapult Pass. It's a 3/2 beast that costs 4 black, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature opponent controls gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is your devotion to black. So yeah, encoring this and getting 3 copies of it can be incredibly impactful, and again, we basically can just get rid of 3 creatures on the board, whatever 3 we want. And then we've also got some creatures that can help us temporarily get rid of other creatures with Aven Surveyor and Roaming Ghostlight. Aven Surveyor is a 2/2 Flying Bird Scout, and when it enters the battlefield, we choose 1. we can either get a +1/+1 counter on it or return target creature to its owner's hand. And then Roaming Ghostlight is a 3/2 flying spirit, and when it enters the battlefield, return up to one target non-spirit creature to its owner's hand. So each of these can be effective in a lot of situations, clearing out some creatures and helping get our creatures through, and on top of that, we can actually utilize their ETB to get one of our creatures back to our hand if we want to use their ETB again. But some other ways for us to bounce creatures or get them out of our way comes with Snapback, Runaway Together, and Totally Lost. Snapback is an instant for 1 and a blue and says you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost, return target creature to its owner's hand. So that's a bounce spell that we can potentially cast for free. And then Runaway Together says choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players, return those creatures to their owner's hands. For just 2 mana, being able to bounce 2 creatures is a pretty good thing. And then Totally Lost is an instant for 4 and a blue, and it says put target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. And actually getting a card on top of an opponent's library can be a death sentence for that card in this deck because again, we've got plenty of ways to mill that card. We've also got some ways to pin our opponent's creatures down with things like Frostlinks, Frost Trickster, and Chillbringer. Frostlinks is a 2/2 elemental cat, and when it enters the battlefield, we tap target creature and opponent controls, and that creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. And then Frost Trickster and Chillbringer do the exact same thing, but Frost Trickster is a 2/2 flyer, and Chillbringer is a 3/3 flyer. So again, they can temporarily shut an opponent's creature down and also get some damage through. And then we've got an aura that can really lock an opponent's creature down with Charmed Sleep. It has, when it enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature, and enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So unless they can get rid of the aura, that creature is probably going to be pretty useless. And then Choking Tethers can help us out in a different way. It's an instant that says tap up to 4 target creatures, and it's got cycling for 1 and a blue. And if we choose to cycle it, we can still tap 1 target creature. So this can be a great way to get a lot of our creatures through on one opponent, or draw a card with this and still tap something down. And then Universal Solvent is essentially, well, it's basically a universal answer. It's an artifact for 1, and it has pay 7 and tap it to sacrifice it and destroy target permanent. So this can get rid of basically anything we need to. But we also have some creatures that can help get rid of our opponent's hands with Liliana Steward and Serum Raker. Liliana Steward is a 1/2 zombie for just a black, and we can tap and sacrifice it, and target opponent discards a card, activates ability only anytime you cast a sorcery. So this can essentially get itself into our graveyard for our commander to then, encore it. So for just 2 mana, overall, we made our opponents discard a total of 4 cards. And by that I mean a total between all of them, but yeah, we can essentially wipe out one player's hand usually with this. And speaking of wiping out hands, there's Serum Raker, which is a 3/2 Drake with flying, and when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each player discards a card. So again, by encoring this, that's going to be 3 cards per each player, so that's basically 9 total cards from our opponents, and yeah, 3 for us, but again, discarding is not necessarily a bad thing for this deck. Regardless, we're almost done with our creatures, but we still have some left with some really cool effects. So first up, we're going to be running cards like Defiant Salvager, Sylvangar Scavenger, and Spinal Centipede. Defiant Salvager is a 2/2 that has sacrifice an artifact or creature, put a +1 counter on Defiant Salvager. A sacrifice outlet like this one can be very effective in this deck. First off, it can get creatures that we actually want to encore right into our graveyard for us. And while we do that, we're growing our Salvager to actually be a pretty big threat. And keep in mind that when we encore, those creature tokens are going to be sacrificed anyways, so we might as well sacrifice them to this. So essentially, every single time we encore, we get 3 extra counters on this. Speaking of which, there's Sylvangar Scavenger, a 2/3 zombie bird with flying and exploit. So when this comes into play, we can sacrifice a creature, and again, sacrificing a creature in this deck is usually going to be a good thing. It says whenever that creature dies, put a +1 counter on Sylvangar Scavenger, it gains haste until end of turn if exploited at creature. So again, like the Salvager, this can get huge throughout the game, and it's got flying, so yeah, we can usually get a lot of damage through with this. We can also grow other creatures as well, though, with Spinal Centipede. It's a 3/2, and when it dies, we get a +1 counter on target creature. So again, if this is encored, we're getting 3 counters on something, and again, if we throw them on a flyer, usually they can get damaged through. But we can also help get creatures through with things like Phase Dolphin and Kitesail Skirmisher. Phase Dolphin is a 1/4 elemental whale, and when it attacks, another target attacking creature can't be blocked this turn. So again, if we've got a big threat like that Salvager, we can make it unblockable, and if we actually encore this, we can make 3 things unblockable. And then Kitesail Skirmisher is a 3/1 flying human pirate, and whenever it attacks, another target creature attacking the same player or planeswalker gains flying until end of turn. So this can really help us out in combat, and actually this one's got encore on its own, so if we don't want to utilize our commander's ability to make it encore, we can encore it separate. Another creature that can help us out in combat is Karfell Kennel Master. It's a 4/4 zombie berserker, and when it enters the battlefield, up to 2 target creatures each get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. So this can make creatures deadlier and make them a lot harder to deal with in combat. And speaking of making creatures deadlier, there's Spire Mangler, a 2/1 flying insect with flash, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature with flying you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So this can be a nice combat trick for us, just flashing this into play and pumping one of our flyers to get extra damage through. And again, on top of that, we can actually get even more damage through when we encore this and pump multiple things. And maybe one of those targets is Waterfall Aerialist. It's a 3/1 flyer with Ward 2. And Ward 2 is a nice taxing effect to deter opponents from actually targeting this. And then we've got some creatures that can actually gain us a good amount of life with Peace Strider and Bottle Golems. Peace Strider has when it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life, so again on Encore, that's gotta be 9. And Bottle Golems is a 3/3 with Trample that says when it dies, you gain life equal to its power. So most of the time that's gonna be 3 life like Peace Strider, but if we've got ways to pump its power, we can gain even more. And finally, we've got Gravedigger, a 2/2 zombie that when it comes into play, we return target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. There are going to be times that we want to recur certain creatures and not encore them because we maybe just have a lot of creatures in our graveyard and we get extra value out of recasting them. And by encoring this, we can recur 3 creatures at once, which can be really huge. Regardless, now that we've gone through all the non-land cards in this deck, let's tackle the lands. And on this budget, of course, the mana base is very simple with 20 islands and 16 swamps. And again, just a reminder, but keep in mind that basic lands are not included in our overall deck cost. You might either already have them on hand, or you can get some from your LGS, or you can just buy them in bulk and get them for a lot cheaper than you would just getting them individually. But now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, including the land, let's talk about that price. Again, like I mentioned, and like you saw in the thumbnail most likely, and the title of the episode, this entire deck costs just 84 cents. Every single card in the deck is just 1 cent, and then we've got a 21-cent commander with Arami of the Dead Tide. And again, keep in mind, like I mentioned earlier, this cost obviously does not include shipping, but yeah, 84 cents for every single non-land card in the deck is still really cheap. Regardless, I hope that you enjoyed this episode because I had a lot of fun making it. It's just an interesting challenge to tackle a deck on the smallest of small budgets. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thank you again, and have a good one.